Everybody, I think we're going. So yeah, once again, hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us. It's for the 8th London Sport and Mayor of London talking about sport. This is the 8th in a series of webinars delivered by London Sport in partnership with the Community Sport today at the Mayor of London office. We're designated to help London's community sport to address some of the challenges that are being experienced as a result of the COVID-19 lockdown measures. My name is Richard Lockwood. I am a relationship manager at London Sport, and as the chair of today's webinar, I'll just quickly run through some housekeeping. So I could ask that everybody keep their microphones on mute and their cameras turned off, please, as I have a lot of people on the call, and it just helps to improve the sound quality and minimise any distractions. Just to make you aware, we will be recording this session for those that are unable to attend today and prefer to be outside in the sun. And it will be available on London Sports YouTube channel and on demand after. So, these webinars have been developed in response to the crisis to address the biggest issues facing London's physical activity and community sports sector at this time. Each webinar has been led by a representative from the Mayor of London's community sports team and a representative from London Sport. We've also brought in some external industry expertise to provide wider insight on specific topics. We've delivered all of these webinars through Zoom. However, we're conscious of the accessibility challenges that webinars can present. So the post-session recording will be fully subtitled when we release it. So in today's webinar, we'll be exploring social distance sport. So as I'm sure we're all acutely aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted on all aspects of society, including community sport, and lockdown measures have changed the way in which activities can be delivered, and the relationships between different guidance documents can be quite difficult to navigate. So this is some confusion for individuals and organisations as to how to deliver community sport in a safe way whilst these lockdown measures are in place. And we also know that through the insight gathered during lockdown that it has affected people in different ways, and the evidence suggests that it is exacerbating pre-existing illnesses and it's having a profound impact on activity levels and physical and mental well-being more generally. So it was with this in mind that the Mayor of London Community Sport team decided to fund a social distance sport in an attempt to navigate some of the aforementioned challenges, while also trying to highlight activities that may be emerging during this period. The impression was that these overarching documents were more focused on what you can't do rather than what you can do. So there was a desire to provide the sector with some more practical, delivery-focused advice rather than more top level. So the purpose of this webinar is to share some of the learning from that pilot and also some more general delivery of social distance support. And to talk about this topic today, we're joined by 4 guests. So firstly, we have Hilary Lissenden, Head of Community Sports for the Mayor of London. Hilary leads the Greater London Authority Community Sport team, and she'll be introducing some of the more high-level learning from the pilot and explaining how this will be presented and shared. Is Kevin Community Sports. So as Community Sports Lead, Kevin oversees and plans sport activities and events related to schools and the community. Kevin is going to outline 10 top tips for delivering socially distant community sport, and this is based on learning that I've identified from delivering the pilot. We're also joined by Michael Hull, founder and chairman of the trustees of Racket Cubed. Michael founded Rackets Cubed in 2016 with the goal of enhancing the long-term achievement of inner city children through integrated racket sports and STEM, so science, technology, engineering and mathematics education and nutrition programs. So Michael joins us to talk about the impact and evaluation of Rackets Cubed's own social distance sports project. And finally, we have Azim Mohammed, Director of Operations at Salam Peace, and Aziz's role involves planning, coordinating and developing Salam Peace's weekly engagement programme alongside managing their community engagement officers. So as we will be sitting on our panel for the Q&A session to share some reflections as a part of the organisation. So I'm sure you'll all join me in welcoming our speakers and in thanking them for taking the time out to share insight with us today. So in terms of the running order, for the first half of the webinar, we'll hear from our speakers. First up is Hilary, followed by Kevin and then Michael. And the second half of the webinar will be the question and answer session. You can submit questions in the Q&A function, as I think we've already put in the chat, or you can send to my colleagues privately. And you're welcome and encouraged to submit questions throughout the presentations. So without further ado, let's get started and I'll hand over to Hilary. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. I don't know about everyone else. I think a few people were having trouble hearing. We had some audio issues when you were talking, Richard. I don't know how much people got. Leela, are you able to come on and just tell me whether you can hear me all right now? Can anybody?
Yes. Yeah, you're very clear.
I'm very clear. Okay, thanks. Hopefully everyone got the gist of that. I'm just going to dive straight in, but if there are any questions on anything that you partially heard that Richard said, please put it in the chat and we'll answer it in the chat. So I was just going to speak very briefly and give you a bit of context around the socially distanced sport pilot that we ran for 5 weeks in Hackney, finished a couple of weeks ago, why we did it, who was involved in it, and then what we're hoping to share with you both today and subsequently, hopefully, to make this really thorny issue of return to play, return to community sport a little bit clearer and sort of hopefully add value to some of the guidance that's already out there. Our intention was never obviously to replace that. It's an impossible task, but to enrich it and also to test in real time on the ground some of the challenges and the opportunities that returning to play at social distance could offer. So the pilot's very complicated, even though it's short and sort of limited in scope, because we had to get it off the ground so quickly. And all of you who've worked with the GLA, and I say this in the most professional way, will know that it's not always easy to get things approved and up and running very quickly, and it had a lot of moving parts. So effectively, we ran it for 5 weeks in Hackney, funded by the Mayor of London's office with support from London Sport, delivered by Badu Sports and Salam Peace, at a primary school grounds, Mossbourne Primary School in Hackney, with involvement by the teachers, by the PE departments of the secondary and primary school, because one of the challenges obviously was schools coming back and having to deliver the curriculum in ways where the government guidance was conflicting and challenging and sometimes confusing, so we wanted to help the schools as well. It was evaluated by our impact partner, evaluation partner in Focus on the ground. Graham came along and did the sort of legwork during the pilot. It was covered in terms of photography and video by our really talented young interns from the Mayor of London funded projects from BComs, and Our Content Changed the Game, which gives young people from disadvantaged backgrounds particularly the opportunity to learn skills behind the camera, represent London's diversity from their own perspective, and film athletes and community events and major sports events when they're happening from their own perspective. So they covered the project as well. And it was visited by Sadiq on the 17th, which was just the day after the pilot actually finished, a highly successful visit where he was really impressed with what had been achieved by everybody involved in such a short time. The reason we wanted to do the pilot, and we had to get it up and running very quickly, was because there had been, obviously, as you all know, no sport, and then sport or sort of some physical activity within certain household units was permitted outside, with varying sort of guidance around, you know, quite confusing guidance around what sports could be delivered and where and how. The problem that we were having was that outdoors, very difficult to find spaces, particularly for children, young people and their families, to actually do any sport. The parks were overrun and had problems with litter and hygiene. you know, there was just basically a real difficulty in finding safe places for children and young people to do sport. The sports that were permitted under government guidance at the beginning weren't ones that were necessarily easily accessible or affordable, particularly by young people in London. And so what was happening was people were going to the parks and doing sport in their full contact form without facilitation, without any kind of education or guidance about what was safe in terms of delivery. So we decided to launch this pilot. We chose 3 sports, basketball, netball and football. The reason we chose those sports was that they don't lend themselves very naturally to social distancing and involve an element of contact. So whilst cricket and tennis and table tennis and golf, you know, reasonably easily can be performed with social distance, those sports can't necessarily. So what we wanted to do was test those sports specifically and look at what the challenges of, you know, everything involved, so health and safety, hygiene, keeping the young people engaged, getting them re-engaged, making sure that they understood why they were being asked to do or not to do the things that the coaches were saying. This was what we were testing, and it was really interesting because, as Kevin, I'm going to hand over to you in a minute, will tell you, things were happening each week, each session that the coaches were learning from, that everybody involved was learning from. So we're going to share all of those learnings with you both during this webinar and disseminate those learnings afterwards in ways which we can explain. So the only other thing I really wanted to say before handing over was there are 2 really key learning points which Kevin will talk more about, and other panelists as well, that came out of the project. And those were really simply, in terms of what I'm going to say, but not in terms of how it's done, risk mitigation and adaptation. And both those things combine, they're mutually sort of dependent and will be ongoing, because I think everybody will be aware now that we are not out of the woods with COVID, that it's going to continue posing a challenge. We may get spikes, we may get local lockdowns, and therefore it's a constant process of assessing, mitigating risk and adapting, communicating, sharing learnings and producing enhanced risk assessments around what we've learned. So I'm going to let Kevin and our other panelists talk a little bit more about that. We're obviously not the only people who are doing really good work in this space, and people like Michael and his group's been doing some great stuff in schools, and they're going to share some of the school, primary, secondary specific learnings with you today. So I think without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Kevin. Unfortunately, we did have a really fantastic video, about 4 minutes long, that we were going to share with you now before Kevin spoke, but we've had tech issues, and I think I'm glad that we're not sharing it given the problems we've had with sound. So we will make sure that that's shared straight away afterwards, and we're actually, the Our content interns with their lead tutor Ernest are going to be captioning that as well for accessibility purposes. We weren't able to do that in time for the webinar, but it will be done shortly, and the whole thing will be shared with captions hopefully as early as next week with participants, and more widely around the recording of this webinar. So that's everything from me at the moment. I'm going to stay on the call and answer any sort of GLA specific questions that might come up on the panel. Kevin, are you ready? I'm going to hand over to you now to give your presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Hilary. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, good. So we'll start off with the first tip. Hopefully it comes up on the screen. So our first tip was keeping all parties in the know. So I thought it's really important to communicate with everyone. So that's families and your young people, your participants that are involved. Make sure you've had all consent forms signed really early. These can be done in the form of letters, or it can be done via email, so it's easier and easily accessible. Also encouraging parents to stay and watch. So I think it is really helpful for the children when they see their parents outside watching, obviously at a safe distance. And it's really encouraging for the parents to be involved and actually see how it will work, and then it makes them feel a little bit more safer. If you have older participants taking part, if you speak to them a little bit early, maybe get them down to the venue to come and watch, because we found getting them down there just to have a day of where they can just walk around and see how things will work, not actually taking part, it made them feel a little bit more safer. Also very important to stick to the government guidelines. Don't come and make up your own sort of rules. Whatever the government set out, stick to that, but add in your own little bits in terms of how many times you want to wash hands or how many times you want to clean equipment, so on and so forth. Tip number 2. make it safe for all. So when you're planning, think about the whole session. Don't just think about, if I'm doing a football session, I'm going to make sure that cones are spaced out. Think about, are there markings outside of where the sport is actually taking part for parents to stand social distancing? I know a lot of people all going into supermarkets, they know what lines on the floor may mean, they know what cones may mean. So for them just to see that, I think it's a lot easier. You might not even need to explain it in depth, they just see it and understand where to go. Also marking out waiting areas for where, if you're using a gated area, where participants could stand before entering, so they're not in huddles and bunches. No, it's when children tend to see their friends they haven't seen for a long time, it's really easy for them to just go run over and jump onto their friends and hug their friends. But if you've got areas marked out, it's kind of really helpful. The same with when they've got their bottles and their bags. What we decided to do was put up name tags, or like child 1, child 2 in different areas, which were 2 meters apart. So then they know exactly when it's time to get my water, I just step over here because I've put mine at a safe distance. And when it's time for me to have my rest, I also remain here in a safe distance. Also having staggered starts. So if you've got like 3 groups coming in, the first group might come in 5 minutes before, get their hands washed. By the time their hands are washed, the next group are now ready to come in, get their hands washed, and so on and so forth. The same with when you're leaving. So the group that started first would also leave first, and that will follow suit like that. Hands washed before and after session. So we decided to have our hands washed first, 20 seconds, and then throughout the sessions, maybe 3 times throughout the sessions, coaches might carry a hand sanitizer on them and just give it a quick squeeze. Children wash their hands just before they're drinking their water bottles, then they can come back and carry on. Tip number 3. So remember social distancing. I think it sounds a little bit silly, but you can do so much planning that you can almost kind of forget to remind people to social distance. So I think discussing the importance of it with the coaches and with the participants taking part is really, really vital. I think the first 2 or 3 sessions, before you start a session, maybe it's good to have a sit down and just find out what things coaches might struggle with, or children might be struggling with, or children might be a little bit wary about. And then after 2 or 3 sessions, I think they'll start to understand and start to be a little bit more at ease with it. No physical greetings as well. I know a lot of people have been doing elbows and fist bumps, but if you just cut it out completely, I think it makes it a little bit more easier. So we found it a good idea just to create something ourselves. So we had like almost like a beat of the chest and then like a hand in the air. So it's almost like that's our form of saying hi, but you can create anything you like. Like I was saying, be creative with your greetings as well, and it's something fun for the children. Tip number 4. Hello? Yeah, sorry. Tip number 4. So plan and plan again. I think this is, for me, because I'm an over planner, I think it's really important to have one central person who plans all sessions. They may be very, very basic sessions, but I think that's easier. So have a basic plan or something that you've already been doing and just find ways to social distance it. Don't overcomplicate. I think when you start to overcomplicate, that's when things become a little bit more difficult, and then you realize that people can't actually social distance. So if you've had plans already, think of ways, how can I make these social distance worthy? It's important to over plan as well, in terms of like, because you've got 6 or 5 in a pod, you want to make sure that you over plan, because you've got less amount of people, there's less room for people to make mistakes. So because you've got less room to make mistakes, if you've planned an hour session, you might, and the session is an hour, but you've only got 6, you might need to plan an hour and a half or a 2-hour session, because you're going to need room for lots and lots of progressions. It's important that your sessions remain of a high intensity, because there's low numbers, it's easy for the intensity to drop. So it's literally on from one session, bang straight to another session, bang straight to another session. You can just keep it consistent and keep it flowing. Also, leave room for coaches to adapt the session if necessary. So like I said, I would plan a basic session, but leave gaps where coaches might say, oh, do you know what? I can stick to what has been planned, but I can make it a little bit more harder, a little bit more easier. Encourage coaches to add their views and inputs into the session as well. But also, like I said, stick to the main outcome of the session. Tip number 5. So competitive and creative is best. Like I was saying before, if it is a very, very basic and boring session, 6 children or 6 participants would tend not to put in the effort. But if you've made it something a little bit different, like using pieces of equipment that you wouldn't normally use, just say, for example, in football, you used hula hoops, you wouldn't normally use a hula hoop. they're almost like, oh wow, this is something different. I'm going to try a little bit harder here, even though there's only 5 or 6 people I might be competing against or working against or working with. I need to up my ante a little bit. Tip number 6, which is the importance of a floater. So a floater was one person, which was myself throughout the 5 weeks, that goes round and just reminds coaches, reminds children to keep that social distance. So it just kind of alleviates some pressure off the coaches so they can focus literally on the session, and I can just go around and remind them of that. Also, if any equipment needed to be cleaned, if children touch cones or balls and they've been put to the side, then I can just come around and give it a quick spray and a quick wipe and just get that moved on. Also, that floater can also be there to have conversation with parents who are outside, remind parents to keep their social distancing and things like that. Tip number 7. So first aid with a change. So accidents are always going to happen when sport's being played. I would say don't change much in terms of your first aid, just change your approach. So naturally, if a child hurt themselves, you'd run over, be close to them, maybe help them up or something like that. But with this, you'd probably ask a few more questions before you get close. So you'd keep your 2 meters, but ask questions like, where is it hurting? How did it happen? If it's like a cut or a graze, you would give your wipes or your plasters, and depending on their age, you'd ask them to administer it themselves. So it's like a little graze, you can give them antiseptic wipe, and they could just literally wipe it themselves and give them a bag to put it in themselves. Have gloves on board, just in case you do have to actually physically touch someone and help them up. So having gloves is very, very vital. Also follow the procedures in terms of calling emergency services if it's something really severe and serious. Tip number 8. So debrief and discuss. This is where the floater also becomes important. They can also say what they've seen, what works really well, what they think hasn't worked well. Maybe they've had to consistently keep telling people to social distance. So maybe the coaches need to have that in the back of their mind as well. I need to be aware of this. It's an opportunity for coaches to feedback any relevant information, how participants behaved, whether they felt participants enjoyed it, were putting effort, so on and so forth. And it allows coaches to also say why they adapted the session, like what was the reasons for adapting the sessions. Tip number 9. So this is the coach's feedback, similar to the last slide. It's a chance for them to voice their opinions, what they liked about the session, or how they're actually feeling themselves. Because some coaches may be feeling a way, but they just might feel, oh, it's my job to deliver this, but this is a difficult time. It's not a natural time. So it's an opportunity for them to just let me know or let senior staff know like how they're feeling, if they're comfortable doing it, if they're not comfortable. They may also have suggestions because they're actually delivering a session. They may have suggestions of how children should enter or children should leave. And they might also say maybe the social distancing sport is not working, or we can do this to completely change it, and letting you know which participants are involved, which participants are not involved, so you could kind of have a conversation with them or their parents to find out why. And our last tip number 10. Should be, learn to adapt. So obviously change can be difficult, but there's always positives from anything that is difficult, and there's always positives from change. Don't be afraid to change it if you feel like something isn't working. So that's the whole, if you've planned everything and you come on the day and it's not working, don't be afraid to go back and change it completely just so it fits and it does work. Take the rules that you've set out very seriously. Don't just make one central rule and then for a child that may be doing something that you like, make it a little bit different or lenient for them. Don't do that at all. Stick to the rules that you've set out. Try to create sessions and plans which you might continue using after this. After COVID's gone, you might have created some session plans that are really good, and it does still keep that distance, but it still has the elements of where they can progress and improve. Some things you've had to change, like I said, might end up staying forever. So always over plan and always overthink. So those are my top tips.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kevin. I understand we've been having some audio issues, so hopefully you can all hear me now. Kevin, can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, thanks for that. Brilliant presentation. I love the conciseness and just bite-sized information, so brilliant. Thanks for that. So I'm going to pass straight over to Michael.
Can you hear me, Richard?
I can, Michael, thank you.
Right. Okay, my video hopefully should be coming up pretty soon. Could you put my first slide up at all, or yeah. Okay, so I'll be really quick because I'm conscious of the time. What pre-COVID, what we as a charity do is we work with primary schools in areas of high disadvantage. We were founded in London, but we do run programs in Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, Hull, Wakefield. And what we do is we partner the primary school with a aspirational setting, and obviously that's somewhat subjective, but a good example would be here in Roehampton, UK's largest council estate. One of the schools goes into Roehampton University. All the programs pretty much do the same, have the same format. They're 2 hours after school. They do an hour of some form of racket sport. They do an hour of usually maths, but it can sometimes be broader than that, STEM education. And then each site feeds them a evening meal. And we've integrated in impact assessments into each of those. If you go on to the next slide, if that's possible, what we found when obviously COVID hit, all the programs got shut down, but the vast bulk of schools we work with stayed open, as just given the number of vulnerable children in the school environments. And the schools that are asking us for help around food, and we launched something called the community box, which I won't go through today, but many of the schools were sort of saying is asking us, could we help them around the sport? And so we actually started the sport pre the formal opening of the state school system, pre the bubbles, and we obviously we learned quite a lot through that. What we did with the formal opening of the state system after half term, a bit like Hillary and Richard, we ran a 5 to 6 week program, 70 children here in Wandsworth. We ran 2 1-hour sessions during the week, and we gave them a mix of fitness, fun fitness, to be honest, and one of the sports. And the bulk of the sport was tennis, because we decided that obviously it's one of our core competencies, but it was, it's more socially distanced. In addition, we ran an impact study to try and assess how the children had been impacted by COVID, both from a physical fitness perspective and a mental health perspective. And then the aim would be for us to take that and see if we could design a post-summer program. If you could move on one slide, because I'll come back to the lesson. So there's quite a lot of data on this, I apologize. But what was interesting from our impact study we did across the 70 children is we took a baseline measurement in week 1. And remember, most of these children would have been year 6. There were obviously some vulnerable children in years 4 and 5 as well, but the bulk were year 6. They'd been out for 3 months. And so this was them back into school. Most of those children had done 0 physical activity. So what happened was we observed a very large drop in the children's agility measurements, low levels of confidence for them to do activity. The estate that we work on, there are 49 tower blocks, so you can imagine it didn't lend itself to much activity during the lockdown. But what we didn't measure it, but both the schools and the parents were telling us, were large weight gains. And even for children as young as 8, 9, 10, the average is about half a stone, so 3 kilos. And some of the children had put on, over 6 kilos. What was interesting, we took the measurements at the end of the 5 weeks. We certainly didn't close the full gap, but we observed fairly marked improvements on agility. Part of that was driven by their confidence, to be honest. There's no question that children were happier in the school environment with the structure, the food provision. There was less snacking, to be honest, so there had been some weight loss, and they'd actually been doing a lot of sport. So we saw good agility improvement. Confidence, we saw pickups in confidence between differences between boys and girls, which I won't get to on this call. And we saw quite a big increase from most categories across 11-year-olds. So big picture, if you can go back, Richard, what we learned was lockdown had a very, very major impact, and it was just nice to have some data. We're going to repeat in September for obviously the new years 3, 4, 5, and 6 that have been out for 6 months. We can mitigate, but can't close it quickly. So we'll have to see how long it takes to close. But really just going on, to the previous comments, we had to work very closely with the school about safety And what was interesting is there's the government mandates, rules you have to follow, the school rules, and each of the sports actually has its own rules. And you need to and they're not always totally consistent. So we had to spend a bit of time around that. And they evolve. When we first started, there was no concept of a bubble, but there was social distance. Then the bubbles arrived, then the bubbles grew, and now we're going to have mega bubbles come September. So you're going to need to adapt real time as that goes. I do think we found that children want to get close to each other. So we needed to, for us, it was easier to pick sports that were naturally socially distanced. But what we did find as more children got back in, the bubbles got quite large. We could certainly get to 15 in the school bubbles, and it's going to be up to 40 post-September. So you get quite a bit of efficiency in there. And the final thing I'd say is the kids loved it. I think, being locked up in a tower block for 3 months versus having this, there was just a lot of qualitative feedback that was extremely constructive. So that's it from me. I think the two things you asked us to ask about, I agree, adaptation, you're going to have to adapt all the way through, and real-time communication. Things evolve so fast, you've got to speak all the time to everybody.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Michael. Yeah, thanks everyone. Lots of really practically useful information in those presentations. Okay, conscious of time, we're going to move into the second half of the webinar, which is our question and answer session. So if I could ask all of our speakers to turn their cameras and microphones on, please. And at this point, I will welcome Azi Mohammed of Salam Peace. So we've received a lot of pre-submitted questions, and therefore we might not be able to get through them all, with those that have also been submitted during the presentations. But that being said, please do continue to take questions in the chat, but we'll get through as many as we can. So initially, I'm just going to kick off with something that I think both Kevin and Michael alluded to around the relationships between different kinds of guidance, particularly around government, Health England guidance and school guidance. So Kevin, I'll go to you first. I'm just thinking in terms of risk assessments and planning. How did you try to navigate those different kinds of guidance?
So initially, when we were looking at football, we looked at what they've kind of got in place, what the FA have kind of got in place, and they've had a rule where it was 5 in a bubble, 5 children plus a coach, so 6 people in one bubble. So we kind of went off what the FA said in terms of football, and then we thought we could move that along with basketball, because basketball didn't actually have any guidance out there. So we kept that with basketball, and we also kept it with netball. In terms of risk assessments, because we work very closely with schools, we looked at what the schools did in terms of their risk assessments, used a little bit of theirs, and then just adapted it towards what we've already got.
Brilliant. Michael?
Yes, same thing really. So the slightly bizarre thing, we had the government and the school saying you can work with groups up to 15, but we had, for example, tennis said you can only do 6, at least at that time. So we had to, we adapted actually. We had 2 coaches, 2 groups of 6 to get to 12, that type of thing. And actually the school safety protocols, I think, were much more practical, if I'm really honest with you, than the sporting ones, because the schools are living this real time, and gaps between sessions, hand sanitizers, equipment sanitizers. We brought our own, but the schools, and I would strongly recommend everybody brings their own, but our observation was all the schools had them.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so next question. What role do we think larger sports organisations and employers can play in supporting smaller community organisations in terms of survival, but also supporting the return to play? So can I put that to Azi, please?
Yeah, I think it's it's a very good question, actually. I think immediately in situations like that, like the first thing that may come to people's mind is just like money and funding and things like that. And don't get me wrong, we all need those resources to do what we do. But given the current climate where a lot of people may actually have more kind of free time and disposable time, it may even be just leaning on people's skill set. So, for example, some of the parents that attend our ladies fitness class and bring their children to our children's sessions, they had more time, so they were able to kind of speak about their areas of expertise. So some were kind of, their expertise were in kind of healthcare and things like that. So it was them having an informal 15-minute Q&A session with our participants at the end of a session. And that was something that really helped. And it's another way of just kind of starting a conversation about potentially sensitive and taboo topics that we may not be able to speak about elsewhere. So yeah, I think looking at people's skill sets and seeing how their skill sets match or align with what you're doing as an organization is probably a very important thing.
Thanks, Azzy. Yeah, so I suppose that's the reflections of a community organisation. Don't know if you want to come in, Hilary, from more of a sort of an oversight level?
Sure, I totally agree with what Azzy said. I think there's also this real importance that's come out very strongly around how we've gathered our insight into COVID and the crisis and the sort of transition and recovery from the pandemic, and the importance of networks and learning communities and sort of 360-degree insight sharing in a way that we've never really done it before, because we have limited, I'm talking generally in the sector, people have limited resources, limited time to share because they're concentrating on delivery. But I think the more that we can collate insight and evidence and experiences and sort of qualitative case studies and share those. So I know Leela, who's been managing this project for my team, is looking at ways in which dissemination of our insight, maybe from this pilot and more widely, isn't just a kind of from us outwards, but also we are inviting experiences from organisations, from other funders, from other, London Sport, from other networks like Sported, to come back, give us their experiences, and trying to find ways where we can share that kind of in an innovative and creative way. I think that's very important now as well, that whole kind of partnership, collaborative approach across the sector.
Yeah, thanks, Hilary. So I think one of the recurring themes around the questions has been around the renewed understanding of the importance of sport and physical activity for maintaining physical and mental well-being. So the pilot funded by the GLA was for a specific audience. I'm just wondering whether we think how we can serve people who have more long-term health conditions or who are living with obesity, and with how much we think of what we've learned so far is transferable to those audiences. So I'll go to you first, Kevin, if that's okay.
I think if we did something like you're saying, people with long-term health conditions or obesity, I think when it's in a smaller group and it's people similar to them, people are suffering the same thing as them, they can relate to it. So I think it's more enjoyable for them. When you've got loads and loads of different people, it almost becomes like I become forgotten about, and people tend to focus on the ones that are really good at the stuff or really thrive at those things. And I think what we found is, as well, especially with COVID, a lot of the children that we tend to work with, the ones that are really bubbly and really tend to love it, when they came to the social distancing sport, they were the ones that were the most quietest, and they were like almost in the corner. But then as they saw that, oh, do you know what? Not everyone's going to be here. It's only going to be me and 4 other people or 5 other people. Slowly, as the 3rd, 4th week, they started to come out of the show and they started to enjoy it a bit more, and they started to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, Michael, part of your project was around measures, so I'm just wondering if you could maybe elaborate on some of the impact you think the work's had on some of those children. Yeah,
I would say the biggest impact was just on their mental health. Although we observed it on the physical health, I think it was more driven because they had an extremely difficult 2-3 months, and just in the physical nature of where many of them lived. And so just going out and having some form of structured activity, and it was fun. I mean, we were not trying to teach them the technical, to the nth degree of the sport. It was really driven by fun and exercise. And I can see just some of the comments. I tell you, although we've gathered it, and we'll obviously share that more broadly, the report, so you can see the data, the most compelling thing is you actually see the children, and you speak to the coaches, and you see the happiness in their faces. And I would say we observe that very fast. Very fast. Now, they're in a controlled environment, and it's slightly different than Kevin, that all these children would have been at school together in the same year group, so they will have known each other. So we didn't have that hurdle for ours, but very quick impact is our observation.
Thanks, Michael. A question here maybe around that personal touch, and with coaches wearing masks and keeping physical distance, just questions around how we navigated that interaction with younger people. I'll go back to Kevin, please.
So we had coaches that were delivering the actual sport not wearing face masks, just because I think it kind of puts the children off a little bit if they're almost like, so why are you wearing it if we're not going to wear it? So coaches that were delivering the sport not wearing it. That floater, at times the floater was wearing it, but if we had anyone else, like let's say for example you have a coach that's just coming around to have a look, they have to wear the mask. If you're not delivering and you're around watching, you have to wear the mask. And I think then children understand, because children now, they understand what the mask means, the reasons why we wear it. But if we're in close proximity and you're working with me, no, there's no masks.
Azzy, did you have any reflections on your delivery so far during lockdown?
Yeah, I think similarly to Kevin, our delivery staff weren't wearing face masks for the exact reason. I think also, like, in terms of personal touch, I think just making your participants aware of the effort that goes into making these sessions occur is just another way of building that empathy and developing that relationship, because obviously the participants and stuff that we all work with may not know really what goes on and the effort and time and resources that go into this. So just even making them aware of what goes on just really helps build that empathy, and then really makes it a little bit more personal, and they feel like, you know, we're going out of our way to make sure they can have a fun, enjoyable and safe experience. So I think that's another way of kind of building that personal touch as well.
Absolutely, thanks, Azzy. So a question now on how we prioritise. Obviously we have limited numbers of people that we can deliver at one time, so I suppose it's how we manage and prioritise who attends those sessions, and with lower numbers available, is it an opportunity to focus on specific children that may require more mentoring or more guidance into returning to play? So just and ask for some ideas around that, please. So if I could go to Hilary first.
Sure, I think it's a really good point, Lee. I think one of the things we're very concerned about as well is that children and young people have lost their regular face-to-face contact with maybe their most trusted adults, who might be their teachers or their key workers or their sports coaches during lockdown. And some of those who might have been on the radar of agencies and schools as being vulnerable maybe might have fallen through the gaps and fallen between two stools, and nobody quite knows where they are or what they need. And one of the things that everybody's work on this call and beyond has shown that online delivery is not a substitute for face-to-face peer interaction and interaction with those trusted adults. So I think the answer for me, it's obviously a bit broad and vague, but it is to keep really close contact, as Michael, Kevin, as you have all said, with schools, with local organisations, with agencies who have really good knowledge on the ground of the young people, the YOSs, the YOTs, and making sure that as far as possible we're reaching not only known participants but also new cohorts of children and young people and their families who need that extra support. So that's where the local knowledge, the experience, the expertise of all you guys on this call, all of the participants as well as the panelists, the delegates as well as the panelists, I think can really play a very important part in that, to make sure that that data and insight, we're not just relying on what we've had from the past, but it will have changed, and we need to update ourselves and gather as much evidence and intelligence about those at-risk young people as we possibly can. And then yes, Lee, more sessions with smaller bubbles, obviously, and then that raises issues of workforce capacity and upskilling your workforce as well in areas where they haven't had to necessarily support people before, but because the agencies are so overwhelmed with bereavement counselling or mental health support or whatever, to actually upskill the coaches and the staff and the trusted adults in feeling safe and secure in themselves as well, and able to offer that kind of emotional support which is needed at this time. So it's a real challenge.
Definitely. I'm just going to pass that over to the rest of our panel around how you have maintained that contact with those young people that you maybe haven't been able to deliver so far, and sort of kept them engaged, or maybe those who are more apprehensive to return to activity, just how you've managed those conversations. If I can go to Azzy first.
Yeah, so for, I mean, some of our participants that may have underlying health conditions or live with those with underlying health conditions, or for whatever reason just have been unwilling to attend, is making use of Zoom, as I suppose everyone has now this year. So it's maybe, yeah, just keeping contact in Zoom, so having like a weekly safe space where people can, you know, conversate and just see each other, even though it's not the same as physical contact. Just being in a same shared space was useful. And then yes, it's just regular contact, just checking in to see how they are, whether they need anything, whether there's any support that we can offer, and just letting them know that if they do need anything, we're there for them, and we even though they're not with us physically, we still are their support network, and are ready to kind of cater towards their needs.
Thanks, Adi. Kevin, do you have anything to come in?
Yeah, so similar to Azzy with the Zoom thing, we also did like regular fitness sessions on Instagram. So they can log on their parents' phone, or their parents can log in, they can do it with their parents, and you'd have different levels. So Monday might be a really difficult level, Tuesday might be intermediate, and so on and so forth. And then we also did like challenges, like basic football or basketball challenges. So when you do the challenge, the children kind of have to film it and then send it in to us, and then we'll post it on our Instagram. So they've almost practicing something, but they think they're going to win something, but you're actually doing a form of exercise.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. You touched earlier around conversations with parents or guardians around managing their expectations of the sessions and their sort of behaviour. Can you just go into a little more detail as to how you had those?
So because most of the children that we worked with, they come from our teams, our football teams and our basketball, netball teams that we already work with. So it was almost a thing for them, because we're so, I don't want to say strict, but we are strict with the children. So they kind of know how the rules are. For them, it was almost like, are we going to be able to upkeep that same level of strictness and professionalism with the social distancing sport? Is it going to be as intense as it was before? So with them, it was like we explained to them what the sessions will kind of be like, what is going to be involved in the session, and whether you want to stay around to watch it so you'd understand. And a few of them did stay around to watch it. And after the first 1 or 2 times, there was almost like, oh, I trust it, so I'm going to go and have a coffee and come back, because I know that, yeah.
Michael, same question to you around conversations with sort of guardians around their expectations.
We so the parents weren't allowed physically into the school, so it's interesting that at least the schools we had, they were very conservative about them coming on site. But all the children did participate in our community programs, which I'd referenced at the beginning, and so we have, and we still do through the summer, a weekly dialogue with actually with the parents, actually, in fairness, not rarely directly with the children on their own, but sometimes children with the parents. You know, so we get feedback in from them, and I think you know, generally most of it's, you know, very constructive, and I think they're just very keen to get the children in some form of structured activity, if I'm honest with you. So generally supportive, but with concerns about safety and you know, obviously many of the communities are nervous still about COVID.
Absolutely, definitely. Okay, at this moment, I am going to bring the Q&A to an end. And before I wrap up, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give me 2 quick-fire takeaways from your experiences delivering socially distanced sport. So you're on the clock. I'm going to give you 30 seconds each to give me 2 bite-sized, the most important pieces of information you can share with our attendees today. So, Michael, you're in the top left of my screen, so I'm going to go to you first, please.
Okay, I'd say adapt your model, because it's important and it can be done. To be honest, so that's something we definitely learned. Nothing's impossible here. And then secondly, just like over communicate, plan and over communicate, because you are going to, this is going to evolve. It's going to change. It's dynamic. We could get a second wave. So you've got to communicate. Issues need to be fed in fast and dealt with fast.
Thank you, Michael. Hilary.
Sorry, having trouble tech unmuting. Okay, I just wanted then to raise something that hasn't necessarily been specifically picked up as my 30 seconds, which is the difference between younger children's engagement and older young people. I know Kevin found that it's easier with the younger people, and the older young people are perhaps hanging out with each other outside at school and sport and physical activity sessions, and therefore it's more difficult for them to adhere to guidance, as well as they really seem to need the competitive element. I think Kevin's right, more than just the skills and the drills.
Yeah.
Be creative around making sure that they're engaged and kept engaged with lots of alternative, competitive sort of opportunities that excite them and interest them, and the importance of sharing everything that you guys are learning, getting in touch with my team, getting in touch with London Sport, the delivery organisations to ask questions, help navigate all the conflicting guidance, because we're really happy to support everybody in any way that we can, because we're appreciating the challenges and the position, the pressure that everyone's under with this.
Thanks, Hilary. Azzy?
So the first one, similar to what Michael said, is communication is key. So it's easy to kind of forget that, yes, this is what we will do on a day-to-day basis, but our participants, their parents, they have other commitments, other things that take up their kind of headspace. So if there are any changes to guidance, then do be very quick, prompt, and organized in contacting key beneficiaries. So for example, when the FA guidance changed from 1 or up to 6 people to up to 30 with contact being allowed, we didn't just implement that straight away. We sent a text out to all our key participants and parents with an opt-in. So they had to email us to opt in for contact for their child or themselves to take part in contact sport. And then secondly, it's more of a mindset thing, is to kind of view this or delivery in a social distance manner as a chance to innovate, a chance to be creative, to try new things rather than a burden. Because I guarantee, I'm sure Kevin and Michael have had as well, there's so many things that you would have tried for the first time during COVID that now you'll implement as part of delivery, even hopefully once there is a post-COVID world. So yeah.
Thanks, Azzy. Kevin?
I feel like everyone said what I was going to say, but I'm going to say involve all participants. So just like Hilary was saying about the difficulties with the older and the younger participants, I think involving the older participants a little bit more, like I was saying earlier, getting them down to the space to see what it's like, have a talk about what the sessions could potentially look like, rather than just getting them in and then on the day doing it, because you tend to find that you're constantly going to be saying, move away from each other, social distance, and it becomes a little bit of an annoyance. And then they also get annoyed because they're like, well, we wasn't told this beforehand. So just like you'd let the parents know, let them know. And then over plan, like I was saying with the sessions, an hour session plan for 2 hours, just because you've got so little amount of people who might be really good and they just get through everything you want quickly, and then you're like, oh, I'm stuck here. So over plan and constantly plan sessions.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Okay, I think I'll wrap up there. So again, yeah, massive thank you to all of our panelists and speakers for joining us today. Some really useful information there. I've definitely learned a lot just from listening. So thanks again. Thanks everybody for submitting your questions, both in advance and during the webinar. If you did have any questions that either weren't answered or maybe you weren't comfortable asking in the context of this public discussion, just email them to us at events@londonsport.org and we'll get back to you privately. So as we said at the start, this has been the 8th and the last planned webinar in this series. We really appreciate your feedback on the session and the series as a whole. So if you could please take part in the Twitter poll, which we've put in the chat, we'd really appreciate it. Just to touch on 2 quick things, we've been running a campaign called We Are Not Spectators throughout lockdown in an attempt to shine a light on some of the ways that grassroots sport has got involved in the emergency response to this pandemic, and just demonstrating how important an asset they are to our communities. So please have a look at the hashtag We're Not Spectators on social media, and we'll include a link in the post-webinar email, which we'll be sending later this week, which should hopefully include the video that Hilary mentioned earlier. And please get involved in that campaign as well with your own organisations as you're delivering activities as we return to play. And finally, just quickly highlighting that London Sports Annual Conference, Active London, will return this autumn. We're going to be announcing details on that in the very near future. We're really excited. For the first time, it's going to be a multi-day online conference this year. So hopefully you'll be able to join us, and anyone that's attended any of these webinars, we'll send information out to you as and when registrations open. And yeah, just keep an eye out on our website and social media for the information on that event, and on the guidance and report that Hilary mentioned as well, specifically for the pilot. So yeah, I'll wrap up there. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you to our panel again. Apologies for the audio issues we were having earlier. Hopefully you managed to hear me well enough, and the recording of this will be subtitled anyway. So yeah, thank you very much once again. Take care, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
you.
Bye.